bumblebees, and I'm going to go into a little bit about solitary bees in Northern Ireland. So I'm going to just talk about a bit about bees in general. What is a bee? A bit about our bumblebees, how to ID them, our most common species, and then basically at the end what you can do for them in your garden. So this is kind of in conjunction with our Let Nature In campaign. So we have been running this, and it basically promotes wildlife friendly gardening. So if you haven't already signed up, you can sign up. It's free. You get lots of information how to make your garden wildlife friendly and to do things for bees and a load of other species. So it's just to mention, if anyone hadn't heard of that campaign, that we do have that running, and there's lots of good information in there. So bees, what is a bee? This is, I suppose, a basic information to start. I know some of you may be quite into bees, may know a lot about them already, and some of you may not. So it's just a good place to start. So they are an insect. They belong to class Insecta. They're an insect, and if we kind of divide them down even more, they belong to a different order, and that's Hymenoptera, Hymenoptera. And that basically categorizes our bees, wasps, and ants, and they're all in one big group. And what kind of defines them as one of these kinds of species? Well, they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So they have 3 body parts, and they have 6 legs. That's the basics of it, really. They have antennae. Bees have 2 sets of wings, so that separates them from flies. Flies only have 1 set of wings. Bees have 2. And they have tongues to feed with, so they basically feed on nectar and with this big long tongue. So that is the basics of a bee. So our bee species in Ireland, Ross, could you launch our poll for me? And I'm going to ask you,
Launched.
thank you, if you know how many bee species there are in Ireland. I'll give you a second to guess. Now this is a combination of honeybees, bumblebees, and solitary bees. How many species do you think we have in the whole of Ireland? And this changes quite often, actually. But just to get a rough idea, if you've ever thought about it before, maybe you never have thought about it at all. So sad. Oh, here we go.
You've made it easy. Made it multiple choice.
I did, of course, of course. Okay, everyone's answered. Can we launch them? So all kind of various answers there. Yeah, so actually the majority of you have it right. There are 101 species. So that might be a surprise to you. Maybe that's more than you actually thought there were. Now this changes all the time. It was 99, then 100, then 101. We have new species arriving quite often. But at the minute our that number sits at 101. And that consists of 1 species of honeybee. So there's only 1 species, 21 species of bumblebee, and 79 species of solitary bee. So solitary bees make up the majority of our bees. But yeah, there's a lot of species. I am not going to talk to you about every 101 species. You'll be very glad to hear. But we're going to go into just a few of the more common species, and we're going to start with our bumblebees. So what makes a bumblebee a bumblebee? I just love this little picture. Bum and then bullbee is the rest of it. So their bums actually are quite significant when we talk about bumblebees. But basically they are a social insect, and they have queens, workers, and males. They basically consist, they kind of live their life in a nest, so it's not a hive. We refer to honeybees in a hive, but bumblebees in a nest. So there are kind of key differences, and the numbers of the bees differ. So honeybees, we can have lots and lots of bees, thousands of bees in a honeybee colony. But in a bumblebee nest, this number varies. So maybe 50 to 300, something like that. So far fewer bees in our bumblebee nests. And what is their life cycle? What do they go through in the year? So basically, our queens hibernate throughout the winter. So none of our bees, bumblebees, really live longer than a year. So they hibernate throughout the winter, and they will wake up around now. So you might have seen some bumblebees out already. I know it's starting to get warmer, and our bumblebees are starting to emerge. And this depends on the species, will emerge at different times. But basically, that queen is kind of born at the end of the year. She hibernates through the winter, she's then comes out in the early spring, and she is basically looking for two things. The first thing is food and water is what she needs to sustain herself, because she's been living the whole winter without that. And then the next thing she needs to do is basically find a nest. So once she's kind of fed and watered, you might notice this behavior of these big queens kind of bumbling around the undergrowth or on the floor, and that's basically them checking out little areas to build a nest in. So once they find a suitable nest, and these are things like maybe holes in tree roots or old mouse nests, they love those, something like that. They will start a new nest, they will lay eggs, and they will rear their first workers, and these workers are all female. Then basically these females will go out and they'll be collecting, feeding on nectar, collecting pollen, bringing it back, and feeding up more. And then basically males are only produced at the end of the summer. So the male bumblebees' only really job is to mate and feed. You can make a joke about that if you want to, but I will not. So the males are basically born the end of the year. They don't have a sting, they don't have pollen baskets, because basically all they're doing is they mate with these, they mate with the queen, so that the queens basically fertilize for the next year, and then they go around and feed, and that's it. So bumblebees mate, new queens are produced, and the cycle starts all over again. So basically that queen will last one season, then she'll die, a new queen's born at the end of the year, and she will start the nest the next year. That's basically the basics of the bumblebee life cycle. So we've all probably heard of pollinators and how important bumblebees are as pollinators. Now, this is for a couple of reasons. One, basically, they're quite messy, right? So they have these very hairy bodies, and these hairy bodies basically allow them to kind of catch all the pollen. And what they will then do is they will get covered in pollen, and then they kind of push it down, and they'll push it down into a pollen basket, and that's where they'll be able to carry it around. So it's a really kind of interesting way of doing things, and it's actually quite different from some of our other bee species. This is a different way of pollinating. I'll mention that again later, but bumblebees are quite specific in how they do this. So they also have different tongue lengths. So each species has a different tongue length to be able to pollinate different flowers. And there is a very strange phenomenon that comes with bumblebees, and it's called buzz pollination. And it basically is where certain plants can only be pollinated by buzz pollination, and they can only be pollinated by bees. And tomatoes is one of those plants. So what happens is bumblebees actually buzz and get the plant to release the pollen. And it means that, yeah, bees are the only species that can pollinate these plants. So basically, if you've ever eaten a tomato, which I imagine most of you have, it's down to bees. And there are some places in the world now where they've wiped out all the insects, where they actually now require to hand pollinate. They actually have to hand pollinate tomatoes in like greenhouses because they don't have bees to do it. There are a number of other fruits and vegetables that are only pollinated by bees. Blueberries, aubergine, and kiwi. All of these species require our bumblebees to pollinate, and so this is really just kind of shows their importance. From a selfish point of view for us, they obviously have so much importance, and they have the right to exist, but they also provide us with an ecosystem service. So as I said, we have 21 species of bumblebee in Ireland, but there are 250 in the world. So not that many. It's not something that has evolved that many times, and bumblebees can't really exist in certain climates. They kind of almost like our kind of temperate climate. That you don't really find bumblebees that often, like the tropics and like really hot climates, and in like very cold climates either. They're kind of like a moderate kind of species. But there's 25 in the UK, so they have 4 species that we don't, and we have 21 in Ireland. Now, this 21 species is made up of 15 true bumblebee species, so or social bumblebees. So they are true bumblebees you think of, that life cycle that I told you about. But there's also a sneaky other 6 species, and these are cuckoo bumblebees. So this is basically a different species, a different group of bumblebee species who act just like the cuckoo the bird, and basically they're like a parasite, and the queen will go in. There's 6 species and each one is kind of adapted to a common bumblebee species, and what they will do is they will go in and kind of hide in the nest and basically kill the queen, lay their own larvae and get the workers to rear them. And so it's basically just how cuckoos do it, as a parasite. But it's really interesting, and we have 6 of these species. I'm not going to go into them here, but if you want to find out more information, it's really fascinating. And some of them are there's a couple of them that are reasonably common. They're just under recorded because sometimes people don't know what they're looking for. But I'll mention that again, a few things to look out for when you're looking for cuckoo species. So this is our 21 species. There are loads of great guidelines on online. This one's from National Biodiversity Data Centre. This is specifically the 21 species we have in Ireland. Now, a couple of the whitetails you cannot tell in the field. A couple of the whitetails kind of get grouped together. So technically, really, there's 19 that you could ID in the field, but 21 altogether. And as I said, this is changing. We've had new arrivals, and we just have to keep an eye on it to see if any more turn up. So if you want to ID a bumblebee, where do you start? Well, there's a few little things to do, and you might think that they all look the same, but they really don't. And once you start looking at bumblebees, you'll realize that they are very different, and it's much easier than you think. I would advise you to start at this time of year, because at this time of year we only have queens out, and the queens are the easiest to tell apart. Queens, workers, and males can be different for every species, so it starts getting confusing if you start trying to learn bumblebees in the middle of the summer. But if you start to learn it now, you'll get a handle on the queens, and then it really helps you get a handle on the workers and the males. So the first thing is tail color, or bum, as I like to say, little bumblebee bums. But tail color. So this can basically be grouped into 4 groups. You have the buff colored bums, the white color bums, the red color bums, and then the gingery color bums. So that is basically where you start. If you first look at a bumblebee bum, you can narrow that down right away, by knowing, right, it's a buff bum, it's only going to be a certain number of species. Once you know the bum color, you then look at the bands. So each species will have different numbers of bands on the thorax and abdomen. This one, for example, this is an early bumblebee. So we first look at that orangey bum, we're like, right, that narrows it down to a few species. Then we see that it has 2 yellow stripes, one on the thorax and one on the abdomen, and we know, well, that's an early bumblebee. Sounds very simple, I know, and it's easier once you know. But it's basically bum, then bands. And if you can't identify it from the bum and the bands, your next stop is the face. So there's only a few species basically have very similar colouring, but you have to narrow it down by the face. So some species have, well, most of them I would say have a short face. There's a couple of species have a very long face. So for example, the garden versus the heath bumblebee. Garden has a long face, heath has a short face, but they have the same number of stripes. So sometimes face comes into it, but usually you should be able to get it on bum, tail colour, and then the bands. So I'm going to go through basically the common 6. So the top 6 bumblebees that you will find in your garden, and most places that you look. So the first one is the buff-tailed bumblebee. This is Bombus terrestris. So all of our bumblebee species are in the genus Bombus. Bombus basically kind of means buzzing or humming, so it describes bees perfectly. Terrestris means the ground, so a buzzing bee of the ground is perfect. This is the first queen that you will see in the year. I have seen a number of these already. I saw my first one in January. This bumblebee is starting to be a bit more of a winter forager. They're starting to hibernate less. Now this seems to only really happen in Northern Ireland and Southern England. It's not really common in Scotland or other parts, but we're starting to see this bee. So I have seen this bee every month through the winter, which is very interesting. But it's the hardiest one. It's the only one you'll see winter foraging. It's always the first one you'll see, so it's easier to identify it that way. So queens are really big, and they basically have a buff tail and 2 yellow stripes. Now these yellow stripes are darker when we compare it to the white-tailed bumblebee, which I'll show you next. So kind of darker yellow and a buff bum. Now, this is the queen. Queen's very easy. When you go into workers and males, the workers you cannot tell apart from white-tailed bumblebees. So you just have to class them. We class them as an aggregate. But anyway, focus on the queen for now. I'll come back to this because I'll just show you this one and then I'll compare them. So the second one is the white-tailed bumblebee. You might think at first glance you cannot tell these apart. They look very different, but you really can. If you notice on this bee, the yellow is much more lemony yellow. So this is a dark yellow, 2 stripes with a buff bum, and the white-tailed bumblebee, Bombus lucorum, is a white, very white, clean white bum with 2 yellow stripes. So it's the same, 1 stripe on the abdomen, 1 on the thorax, and yeah, much kind of wider. So just do that again, kind of darker on buff tail and a bit whiter on our white tail bumblebee. And as you can see, the workers totally different, or totally the same basically. The workers here, they are noted as a white-tailed aggregate if you're doing any kind of recording. But then again, the males are very different. So the males will be out later in the year, and males of the white-tailed bumblebee have yellow in the face. Now, only males get yellow in the face. So if you see any bumblebee with yellow at the front, it's definitely a male. Not all males have yellow in the face, just to make it more confusing. But if you do see one with yellow, it's definitely a male. So that's how these two differ. The male of the buff tail looks exactly like the workers, but the male of the white tail has a lot more yellow on it, and yellow in the face. And also, if you ever see a bumblebee with a pollen basket, it's not a male. We know that it's definitely a female because the males don't collect pollen. So that's just another little way to tell. But I would say those are 2 of the most common species that you will see. The next one that looks like, these are almost your typical bees, aren't they? The black and yellow stripy ones. Now, garden bumblebee is a white bum again, but this bumblebee actually has 3 stripes. So it's got 1 at the kind of front here of the thorax, and then kind of 2 stripes splitting and like the thorax and abdomen. So it's actually counted as 3. So sometimes it's harder to tell how many stripes is on it, but there's a few other things to indicate that this bee is a garden bumblebee, and that is the big long face. They're also huge. This is the biggest queen we have, so this queen is huge, and they come out a bit later. And usually you will see this bee on very particular flowers. One of them is foxgloves, because they have the longest tongue. So they have an especially long tongue out of all the species we have, and they're really the only species that has a long enough tongue to be able to feed on foxgloves. So if you ever see a bee coming out of your foxgloves in the summer, which I always do, it's always a garden. 99% of the time it's a garden bumblebee. So yeah, they're very big. I sometimes get people saying, I saw the biggest bee ever, and it'll be a huge big garden bumblebee queen. So she's got 1 stripe at the front, 2 in the middle, white bum, and a big long face. And the workers and males basically look very similar. They look the same. So on to our first of the ginger bumblebees, obviously one of my favourites. Love a wee ginger bee. Now these pictures, I hate these pictures. No common carters ever look like this. I don't know why they still use these pictures, but anyway, this is a common carter on the right, a very common ginger bee. Queens, workers, males all look the same. These can vary in size quite a lot. These would be more your typical bumblebee size. And that is one thing that can be quite tricky with bees, in that it depends how much they get fed, in basically as to what size they're going to be. So sometimes you get really tiny workers and sometimes you get bigger workers. So this is this is a difficult one, because you don't really want to say, oh, they're all going to be this size, because they're always not the size. I have seen tiny little common carder workers, and that was maybe just, that particular nest didn't get as much food. But these are really common. This is probably the most common bee in my garden. I get them a lot. I get lots and lots of them during the summer, and kind of late spring, early summer. They're a little bit later than the other ones. But yeah, a lovely wee bee, pretty easy to recognize. There's a couple of rarer bees that are similar, but if you're just looking in your garden, you're probably not. It's probably not going to be one of them. Um, and one of the things they say is just if you get used to the common species, then you basically will be able to start to recognize things that are a bit rare and things that you know you're like, oh well, that's actually not the thing I thought it was. And then taking photographs and asking somebody that knows a bit more, sometimes you'll be able to find the rarer bees. But it's a good place to start with the common ones. Okay, so that's four of the most common ones. And then the next two are red tail species. So this is the early bumblebee, the little figure that I showed you earlier. I love this bumblebee. They're so tiny. These ones get so tiny. Now they're called the early bumblebee. They used to be the most early emerging bee. They're not anymore, but they're the earliest bumblebee to complete their life cycle. Their life cycle is really short. So you usually see these males the earliest. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about early bumblebees. Much smaller. They have an orangey red bum. Now it's more orange. They call these red. They call them red, but it's more orange. You can see in the picture. And then they have two stripes. So that one in the picture is actually a male. The workers can be tiny, and note that sometimes they are missing this middle stripe. So they will quite often be missing that. So they will have yellow at the front, and then it'll look like they're all black with kind of an orangey bum. But the males will have much more yellow at the front of their faces. And you can see there that male on in the photo on the right. Again, they don't have a pollen basket, so their legs are hairier. So the pollen basket is like a smooth surface on their leg so that they can collect pollen. But this, you can actually see that that male doesn't have one, and that's another sign that it's a male. But yeah, early bumblebee, lovely little bee. The last one, the last most common one is the red-tailed bumblebee. Oh, this is also, I keep saying they're my favorites. This is one of my favorites because it just looks so cool. I think like all black with this red orangey bum. Now you'll notice they're kind of have more orange, and the kind of bum is like a deeper color. So if you go back to this one, it's much lighter. But the red tail is quite a deep kind of orangey red. And basically queens and workers, all black. And then the males, you'll get some kind of yellow around the face and things, so they can sometimes look like early bumblebees, the males of the red tail. But it's easier in the field, it's easier to tell, and usually the biggest giveaway is the there's much more red on the bum. Now these are interesting. They are both like a coastal and an urban species. So you get them on coasts, on sand dunes, but you also get them in your garden. And you get them places like bog meadows in Belfast, and we've had them on our nature reserves and things. They're kind of have those two kind of distinct habitats. But really lovely. So they are the 6 most common ones. I'm going to mention 2 other ones that you might find. It's worth mentioning the tree bumblebee. This is an exciting one for me. That photo, quite a few of those photos are mine. This one is from my garden. So this bumblebee only arrived in 2018, 2017, 2018 into Ireland. Now it had arrived much earlier on the mainland, but it came over, we don't know how, flew over the sea, and arrived here in 2018, and basically was first recorded in Belfast, then Dublin, and now it's kind of spread out loads. Last year we had loads and loads and loads of records of it. And this is a class bee, really unusual. It's the only bee that will nest in trees, so that's why it gets its name. So I had countless calls last year of people saying there is something nesting in my bird box. So these guys nest in bird boxes. It's nothing to worry about. They'll be in there for 2 months and then they'll be gone. But they kind of have this kind of swarming behavior. So a lot of people thought they were honeybees or wasps, and that they were kind of swarming around the entrance to the box. But they're totally harmless. Just leave them be. The birds, usually after the birds have nested in them anyway. And they normally don't go back to the same place. So but it's really cool. I would love one to nest in my garden. But yeah, this was last year. I had one queen. She hung around for a couple of days, and I was very excited. So they spread quite they are spreading out quite a lot. But yeah, queens, workers, and males look the same. But this is just another reason to highlight the importance of recording and why we actually record these species and why we want to take notice of them. Why do we care that there are different types of bees? Basically so that we can see how they're doing and we notice things like these ones when they turn up. From all of the bee kind of information we have from, I do a bee walk, and that information in England, Scotland, Wales, it's managed by Bumblebee Conservation Trust, but here it's managed by National Biodiversity Data Centre. And that basically tells us the trends in bees. So that's shown us that species like common carders actually declined quite a lot, and we thought that was a very common species. So these trends are important, and things like butterflies and bees are very sensitive, and it shows us if something is going wrong in the wider countryside and what we need to do to help them. And basically a third of our bee species in Ireland are at risk of extinction. That is scary. A third, so like 33, 35 species or something are at risk of extinction, about being wiped out and us never seeing them again. So it's very important that we do record them and take some action to help them. So yeah, tree bumblebee. Then one more you might encounter is the heath bumblebee. So this is Bombus janellus. I love this little bee. Really under recorded. I recorded this in Slieve na Clwyd and then found out it was the only record. It's the only time it's ever been recorded, and that was like years ago, and I just think no one's looking for it. I recorded it again recently, but again no one's looking. But this species, basically very similar to the garden, has a white bum and a stripe at the front and then two in the middle, so 3 stripes. But it is much smaller and has a short face, and really you'd be going on habitat too. So really, if you're up in places like Slieve na Clwyd or anywhere with heathy habitat, you might see this bee and think it's a garden, but actually it's heath bumblebee. So yeah, they're a lovely little bee and under recorded. So if you have one, please submit it and let us know. So that is bumblebees. That is 8 species. If you want to get your head around the queens of those 8 species, that is a really good place to start. Solitary bees, right? I'm really not gonna try and confuse you too much, but I think it's just nice to know what this 79 species are made up of. And some of you might be into bees, so you might find this interesting. But mining bees would be our most common. So we have 26 species of mining bees. Our sweat bees, I love some of the names of these. We have 13 species of sweat bee. This one here is the Halictus rubicundus, or the orange-legged furrow bee, one of our most common species of sweat bee. And I've already seen sweat bee out. That is mad. We don't always see solitary bees for ages, and I saw one on Sunday. Some of them can overwinter, which is crazy. Cuckoo bees, so we have 12 species of cuckoo bee. Again, they do a similar thing to our cuckoo bumblebees. They're parasites basically, and most of our cuckoo bees parasitize on our mining bee species. This is a little species of nomada here, a nomada cuckoo bee, and it's on a dandelion for scale. You can see the size of that, and I would also say if you want to go out and look for bees and start recording, just look at dandelions. Dandelions are not only an important food source for bees, they are the most important food source at this time of year, because they're the first thing and sometimes the only thing available for bees to feed on when they wake up from hibernation. So look at dandelions. That is where I record most of my bees, to be honest. A lot of these photos are on dandelions. Blood bees, we have 7 species. Leaf cutters, 5 different species. Love a leaf cutter. I've got a wee video one in a minute I will show you. Plaster bees, 5 species of those. Our white-faced bees, we've got 4 species. Mason bees, 2 species. This is the red mason bee, a little photo from my garden. This is one of the very few species that use bee hotels. These 2 on the top, leaf cutters and mason bees. Out of the 79 species, everyone thinks put up a bee hotel, and only a very small handful of bees will use those bee hotels. Still put them up, they're still very important, but there's a lot of other things you can do for bees as well. Our sharp-tailed bees, 2 species. Some of these are very rare, by the way, so you might not come across a lot of them, but just so you roughly know how they're grouped. Wool carder bee, one species, flower bee, one species, and our carpenter bee, one species. So there you go. We've got 79 species. That's how they're all grouped. That's what makes up our species in Ireland. So yeah, go out, try and find as many as you can. I'm going to talk to you about just four common species of solitary bee very quickly, that you might come across. So the ashy mining bee, this might be one that you're familiar with. It's an early species. You sometimes get it in gardens. It's a lovely little bee, quite easy to identify because there's not a lot of them kind of look like this. It's like an ashy grey color, sometimes called the grey mining bee. So yeah, this is it. It basically mines little holes, little nests in the ground. So the reason they are called solitary bees is because they each have a little nest, whether that be in a bee hotel in the ground or something else, right? And they will lay eggs in there, put some food in, and kind of seal it up, and then they lay another one or whatever. Each of them kind of have different life cycles, but they're called solitary because they do this on their own. But they do, you might see them in aggregates. So some people say this, well, it's not a solitary. I saw loads of them, but they're solitary, but they sometimes congregate, if that makes any sense. So this is one of them, the ashy mining bee, and yeah, you might get this in your garden. So if you want to create a little home for this, all you have to do is leave some bare earth or like sandy soil. The early mining bee, Andrena hemorrhoa, oh yeah, well, I'm saying that's right, that's what I call it, hemorrhoa. This is one I get in my garden all the time. There's a lot of wee Andrena mining bees that look like this, but this one's really reasonably easy to identify because it's called the early mining bee or the orange-tailed mining bee, and it's because they have a little orange bum. So they have a tiny wee orange bit in the bum. And normally people are like, what? And then I've shown it to them and they're like, ah, right, I get that. And you can see it quite easily. And when you look closer, now they're tiny. Females are much bigger. Those are females there. Males are toady. But yeah, if you see a little bee like this standing there with an orange bum, it's probably the orange tail mining bee. They are lovely little bees. We've got our leaf cutters. So these are megachile species, and there are a number of them, but there's a couple that are more common. So this one on the right, if that wee video is playing, is megachile versicolor, which is one of the more common species of leaf cutter. I get this in my garden a lot. And this is what they do. They cut little leaves. I love it. I could sit and watch them all day. I was so chuffed to catch that. I'm going to play it again because I love that wee video. This is my strawberry plant. They love strawberry. So if you ever find these wee discs out of your plants, that's probably what's doing it. It's a leaf cutter bee. And they bring this back and they basically wrap it and they lay a little egg in it and stuff it full of pollen for that little, when that larva emerges, to feed on. It's class. Now these are another species that use the bee hotel. This is one. Now this is a much rarer species on the left that I got in my garden. I was very chuffed to have two different species of leaf cutter in my garden last year. And this one is using my bee hotel. You can kind of see the slightly different colors of kind of hair underneath. And these guys pollinate much differently. They have a pollen brush, so they don't collect pollen in a pollen basket. And they are, I would say, probably more efficient pollinators because they're messier. So they're less efficient at collecting pollen, but they're more efficient pollinators. So solitary bees are very good at pollinating. But yeah, they collect it all in this pollen brush underneath, and then they'll go to flower and move it. So yeah, leaf cutters will use your bee hotel if you put one up. And the other species that you use your bee hotel are the red mason bees. So this is bee hotel, one of my, I think I might have 5 bee hotels one in my garden because I'm just obsessed with watching them. But this is red mason bee. These are a big females. They're much bigger and the males are little. But this is an osmia species, and yeah, a really lovely bee. And these are the two types of bees that will use my bee hotel. So they are four solitary bees. That's it. I can't go into any more. I'll be here all night. But look, if you do want to know more, there are so many good guides out there. There's great books. There's specific ones on bumblebees, but this one on the left on bees in general is really good. Now it covers the whole of Great Britain, so there's some species we don't have. You need to know a little bit before you go into it. It can seem overwhelming, but if you start, as I say, with the common ones, it is really good maps to show that the ones we don't have. Um, this little swatch available from National Biodiversity Data Centre in the middle there is really handy to take out with you. It just has Ireland's bees in it. And then there's countless things like this on the right of like little posters and things you can download online. National Biodiversity Data Centre also do a free wee ID course on bumblebees, so you can go on and practice kind of putting little bees together and stuff. It's really useful, really free. It's really free. It's free and really good. So if you want to help bees, what can you do? There are a number of things really, and one of the main things is providing them with food. We all know that, you know, there's been a whole decline of our insects and there's a lack of food out there for our bees. But there are certain things I like to feed on throughout the year, providing them with nectar sources in areas of basically where they have hunger gaps. So there'll be hunger gaps where there'll be fewer flowers that are out in the countryside, right? And really that is early spring and kind of late summer, early autumn. And that's where our gardens play a huge part. So our gardens really can kind of try and fill those gaps. So making sure there are things for them to feed on in spring. Please leave the dandelions, as I say, they're so important. They love trees and blossoms, so things like apple, cherry, rowan, blackthorn, hawthorn, all of those species they love. And of course we know they're good for a whole host of other species too. And then later in the year, things like ivy is really, really important, and heathers. They love blue. Bumblebees can see ultraviolet light. There's not a lot of blue plants that are natural, but anything blue and purple they seem to really like as well. And make sure they're kind of open and they're kind of plants are easy for bees to access. But again, in our Let Nature In, there's a lot of information and loads of information online about specifically what to plant at certain times of the year. You can try and build a bumblebee nest. Now they're not they do get used nowhere near as much as bee hotels, but basically for bumblebees they need, well, you could leave areas, so leave areas wild. They like to sometimes go into compost heaps, so if you have a compost heap, just be aware if you see bees coming and going from there, maybe just leave it. But you can put basically an overturned flower pot. I've tried this in my garden and I don't like it, but they'll use it at some point. Bees can go quite far to bumblebees can go quite far to pollinate, and they kind of learn the area. So one of the things I would say, this is a lovely little fact that I learned about them, and it just literally, yeah, it's so sweet that if you put a little flag by the bumblebee nest, they'll be able to find it easier because they go by visual clue. So yeah, that just broke my heart, thinking you have like the bumblebees are trying to find the wee flag back to their home. It's so sweet. But bumblebees can forage over quite a large area, so think about all the things that they need. Whereas it's very actually different for solitary bees. Solitary bees do not like to travel far from where they're nesting. So if you want solitary bees to use a bee hotel, put it on a sunny side of something, basically a south facing wall, somewhere sunny, and then have flowers around it. Like I'm talking immediately below it, and in the meter around the area, they will be feeding all very close to there, and they don't like to go far. So if people normally ask you, I've got a bee hotel and they're not using it, that's usually why. So this is one of my bee walls, 3 of my bee hotels on the left. I had them on the other side. I thought the other side was sunnier, and then I started to notice the bees were always sitting on this wall, and as soon as I moved them, they all got used. So all 3 of these are being used, which is, yeah, very exciting. The other thing is, as I said, look, there's only a few species that actually use bee hotels, but they are great. They're great things. Also, when you're buying them, sorry, some of them are crap, I'll be honest. Some of them are much better than others. Look for UK made, because that means they're made for our size of bees. And also if you're buying one, make sure it has a back. If it doesn't have a back, they'll get parasitized really easily by wasps and spiders and things. So yeah, buy one with a back. Bee banks are really good. A lot of our mining species will basically use these, and they'll burrow in, and they'll basically use these to nest in. So if you have a little sandy area or anywhere you could do a little bank that's in a south facing slope, try that, and bees might use it. It's, yeah, another way. You're basically catering for just different species of bees. Thinking about a little bee drinking station. Bees also need to drink. And they can drown quite easily. They don't like going, obviously can't really go into ponds and things. But something like this, this is one of our staff members, Maureen, had done this and I loved it. But it's basically just like putting little pebbles in. If you put like pebbles into your bird bath or a little dish, it means they have something to sit on and drink. And especially in times of really, really hot weather, bees can get really dehydrated. So this is good to do. And look, if you're gardening for bees, you will attract lots of other things. So these are all things I have photographed in my own garden. A very not very common species of ruby-tailed wasp there up in the left hand side, which they parasitize on mining bees and other species of bee in the bee hotels as well. So that was quite exciting to see them in the garden. But yeah, wildlife gardening, it's great. It attracts so many other species, so many other things that you can bring into your garden. And of course, it's not just good for the wildlife, it's also good for us to get out in the garden and good for our mental health. And I really like this wee sign: as I work in the garden works on me, which is very true. So the Let Nature In campaign, there's loads of information. Sign up on our website, as I say, for free, and you'll get lots of good little tidbits about it. And we hope to be doing more of this in the coming years. And to finish off, just a little wee bum, because it's very cute. And I've put our reporting sightings, so you can go through our website, and if you have any bee sightings, they can go through CEDAR, or they go to the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and this is really important to add your sightings. And I've had my email up there, because yeah, if you do want me to chat to you about bees, I'm there.